All right, my name is Raquel. I'm a software engineer at Threadloom. We work on internet forums, trying to improve the internet, and happy to be here. When I was in elementary school, I was invited to apply for a gifted and talented program. And all I remember about this interview was a one question. I sat down with the interviewer, and she put a paper clip on the desk in front of us and said, "This is a paper clip. It just used a whole papers. What else do you think you might be able to do with this paper clip?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, you could unbend it and just use it for other purposes." And she was like, "Yep." And she wrote some stuff down and waited. And then in my head, I was like, "Oh, you could make an earring out of it." And then I thought, well, that's just really unbending it and just using it for another purpose. So I don't want to say that, because I already said that. And so then I thought, well, what else could I use it for? I was like, oh, I could maybe use it to pick a lock. No, that's just unbending it. And then I was like, oh, you could poke a hole in something like an egg and then blow it out, or just use it to carve something. And I was like, these are just all unbending it and using it for another purpose. So and this was all in my head. And so she and I were just staring silently at this paper clip for a really long time. And finally, after a long time, I just looked up and I was like, I just can't think of a single other thing that you could do with this. And that was the end of the interview. And of course, I didn't get into the program. And the sad thing is, I really didn't mind. I was like such a perfectionist that I was like, I feel sorry for her that she had to sit through this boring interview, but it was totally cool with not making it. I was like, yeah, I mean, I did the best I could. So fast forward about a few decades. I have 3 boys, and when they were younger, well, the oldest one was in elementary school. We sometimes would splurge on like a very expensive 1-week Bay Area summer camp, and there was one camp that he went to one year, maybe he was about 6. It was a great camp, actually, even though it was expensive, called Imagineers with a Z, so Imagineers Learning. And since you're paying a lot of money for these things, you're like, I really want to know if I'm getting my money's worth. So after camp, I was like, what did you learn today? He's like, we learned about brainstorming. Do you want to try it with me? And I was like, yeah. So we sat down at the kitchen table, and we had paper and pencils. He's like, okay. And he looks around, and he's like, okay, so we're going to brainstorm about this. And he finds like this deflated balloon on the floor of the kitchen and puts it in front of us. He's like, so we're just going to talk about all the things you might be able to do with this balloon. And I was like, oh, I'm so good at this. Okay. So I start writing 2 things, and I really can't think of very much to do with this. And he's like scribbling away, and I was getting a little bored, so I kind of looked over at his, and I made some comment. And he deliberately puts his pencil down. He's like, all right, I'm going to need some time away from this right now, because you just took me into a traffic jam and I can't be creative anymore. And I was like, oh, really? I'm so sorry. And he's like, it's okay, it happens. And he had this other sheet, which was essentially this, which again, I have to credit, this Imagineers Learning Camp was founded by someone who went to studied at Stanford Design School, and they're teaching design thinking to little kids. And so he showed me the traffic jam, which is a nice visual, and there's all sorts of things written on here that I know you can't see, but it has things like what might be getting in your way of creativity. Maybe you're getting in your own way, which is like me in my paperclip. Maybe someone else is getting in your way. This is like me in my, I don't remember what I said, but obviously not good comment about his brainstorming list. And I was just like, this is so cool that he is learning this. Like, I need to learn this. Why is this not something that I've picked up and I'm using at work? So I just want to pause there and say that when I was figuring out the messaging for this talk, I actually talked to the same kid. He's one of my 3 kids, and he's now in middle school, about how can I make what's the messaging? I don't want to just have a list of complaints about tech culture, not keeping me from being creative. I don't want to or complain about myself or play the victim. And Kat had actually helped me think of a title earlier that I had said, well, no, that title, she had suggested something, and I said, no, I really just want to keep it positive. And so when I had given her this title, she was super kind, because she could have been like, I thought you wanted to stay positive, and confessions, contradictions, and threats. This is not very positive. But she didn't say that. She was really gracious, and she just texted me back one word: powerful. And then I was like, oh no, now I have to be positive and powerful. So I'm not going to try to do both. I'm just going to try to be positive. So all these buzzwords, and they're actually not just buzzwords, they're really good principles, are floating around right now, like in all the schools, not just fancy, camps, but like public schools too, around like growth mindset and grit and like resilience in the face of failure. We're teaching our kids all these great principles. This is from my kid's public school. He got an award for making mistakes, had to leave work in the middle of the day. And he was like, yeah, mistakes are great. It's like the opposite of like my perfectionist tendencies. Khan Academy has this math competition online. You're like, oh, is that going to scare people away? The first module of it is actually these beautiful videos about growth mindset that the kid has to watch before he starts trying to kick butt in these math competitions. So again, why wasn't I seeing this like spill over into, this is like all over Silicon Valley and beyond. Why am I not seeing this at work? That's my question. And you might say, well, because that's work. You need to get things done. It's not kindergarten. And I would say yes and no. Like, yes, you need to get things done, but no, it doesn't have to come at the expense of like a really rich and vibrant learning environment. And that's what I want to talk about. So here's where I talk about books I haven't read, but I really want to read them. And I've seen these talks online from these authors, and they really resonated with me. So the first is David Kelley is one of the founders of the design school, and he talks about creative confidence and that how people with analytic abilities, maybe even perfectionists, like are really intimidated when they're explicitly asked to do something creative, like in a creative activity, and they kind of check out or like act like they're suddenly getting a phone call and don't want to be part of it, and that a lot of it has to do with just this fear of judgment. And so he has this thing called guided mastery around how to get people out of that like fear just to be creative, which I'm really interested in seeing how could that be part of engineering culture. And the second one is, this is a former Google engineer that then went to a couple of startups, and he was reflecting on what he'd learned of like what was and wasn't working in his startups. And one of the things that he talks about is how he realized to be effective, to be productive as an engineer, you have to prioritize investing in your own learning as an explicit priority. So it's not that that was kindergarten, this is work, you can't do that. Like learning has to, and especially in the tech culture where things change so much, you have to constantly be learning. So I want to talk about, well then, okay, let's do that. Why can you just not do that at work? And I want to look at two rituals that I, as an engineer, have spent many, many, many hours doing that I think these rituals have a lot of messaging in them, sometimes explicit and sometimes implicit, that are really contradictory and kind of go counter to like the idea of encouraging like kind of like a fearless learning environment. These are performance reviews and code reviews. So performance reviews, anyone is not just unique to tech culture or engineering, but have gone through them. And I know that they are very necessary, I get it. I know that they're actually also, maybe a great way to like, share honestly with your coworkers and your 360 degrees and like develop better working relationships. But in reality, like this is a stock photo of someone practicing active listening. And like, that's not really how most of my performance reviews have been. They haven't even been in person. They're just in a tool that we build to make it really efficient. And the bottom line is, why do companies spend so much time doing this? Because you have to measure people's performance so you know how to promote and compensate them. Like that's why they're there. I'm not saying that this is very cynical of me. Like, yes, I think there are companies that want us to grow and learn, but that's not why we do this whole thing. It's evaluating us. So of course you're fearful. Of course you're not going to like necessarily like look forward to it. And the code review, I saw like tons of engineers in the room, so you're familiar with them. But for those who haven't done code reviews, it's just kind of like, say I'm going to do a draft of a paper or a piece of writing. I would obviously give it to some people to get some feedback, which can be scary because you might hear like that there's a lot of things wrong with it, but you're hoping to improve it and make it better. And that is kind of usually, if you're doing it for a piece of writing, you might like find a trusted smaller set of people to send your earlier drafts to, and then that it could be harsh, like it could be hard to hear, but they are invested in you and they have your back and they want to help you, and that's why they're helping. That's why they're giving you that critique. A code review would be like that, except because again, we're engineers, there's a tool for it. So you don't really have to talk to the person at all if you don't want to, which is something, and I'll say that I actually love code reviews now. I think they are incredibly important if done right. But I was like terrified of them when I first got to Google. And it's because all the conversation was happening only in these tools. Like I have a project, okay, I need to build a feature or change something. And when I submit it, there's like a left and a right side that shows the changes I made, and then it's not just that I send it to like someone who I trust and have developed a good working relationship with. I may have to send it to someone who I've never met, who's kind of like the authority in this particular piece of the code base, and it may get CC'd to everyone else on my team and everyone else on his team, and maybe even everyone in the organization. And then anybody who wants can go in and like criticize it, which is probably like, yeah, I mean, that could really help me be a better person. But it did not really feel like a safe environment the first time I did this. Like in my third week at Google, it felt like, oh my God, and then I would spend a ton of time trying to perfect it and then send it back again. It would still have like a bunch of like littered with comments, so it was kind of traumatic. But they can be great. They can be amazing. These are two different screenshots from two open source projects. The top is the C implementation of the Python interpreter, and the bottom one is from React, which is a JavaScript framework that powers like Airbnb and Facebook and a lot of web apps. So one thing about code reviews that I want to say are that there's kind of like, there are many cultures within the code review world, and one of them is like, it's kind of okay to be terse. Like, you don't have to sugarcoat every single comment you make. Sometimes you just got to get to the point. Like at the top, he's like, there could be a memory leak here, period, end of story. There's no like, hey, I was wondering, and people are kind of fine with that. At the bottom, you see someone say like, hey, you forgot X, and then the reviewer follows up saying, well, sorry, that was kind of blunt, and then he kind of explains why he was asking, which I really think is great. It took an extra moment for him to say, I was being kind of blunt. And so I feel like this to me is so important, because sometimes there are senior engineers, seasoned engineers who have been on a project for a long time, and if they are demonstrating like a really kind of a harsh, toxic like kind of style in how they review code. This happened at Google. There was a person who I had never met, who was in a different office, but would give like really mean code reviews. And I remember people saying, yeah, well, he like wrote like the first version of Google Maps, and he's just brilliant. So that's just how he's like, just don't worry about it. He doesn't really mean anything by it. And like, my reaction is like, hey, first of all, what do you mean he doesn't mean anything by it? Like that, why are we dropping all of the social norms just because we're in this tool? It's suddenly okay to say things between these pink and green boxes. And two, what example are you showing for the whole team? What kind of values are you setting that it's okay? Oh, I want to be brilliant too, so I should give really harsh code reviews. That'll make me look really smart. Maybe not consciously thinking that, but not unconsciously. So. I like to ask, is our time, do we need to be so efficient? Is our time so precious, and do we care so little about the people we work with that we can't sometimes, take an extra second and prioritize kindness over efficiency? So now I just want to get into some of those contradictions that I mentioned that I feel like we should look at and name so that we can do something about them. So, excuse me. So what I'm going to do is, on the left, I will tell you kind of the messages that we are like sending to kids about how they should approach hard, challenges and problems in learning environments. And on the right, the messages that through like things like performance reviews and code reviews, and messages that we're giving people at the workplace. So the first one, and I got all these from, there's a million sites on growth mindset. Acknowledge and embrace your weaknesses, right? Like the Khan Academy things were like, mistakes are an opportunity for learning, and all these. Even Einstein had to learn how to count, and like kind of debunking genius culture. Like everyone learns, so it's good. It's okay to have a weakness and learn from it. In a performance review, you really need to emphasize your strengths. Yes, we have boxes for like, what needs improvement, but you really don't need to spend that much time there if you're trying to like get a good performance review. You need to spend time talking about your strengths, maybe even exaggerating your strengths. I don't know how many times we had mentorships at Google to like look at how you wrote up your self-assessment and tell you like other women had this whole network of senior women telling junior women how to write them, and telling you like you really can't downplay what you did. You have to exaggerate it. Similarly, for kids, we're telling them more and more, reward people's efforts, not just like, oh, you're such a smart kid. No, like that the effort is something valuable in and of itself. Reward accomplishments. In a performance review, you talk about what you did. Like if you want to go for promotion and you talk about a team effort, you're instructed to like, you should really take the team part out of it and talk about what you did. What did you accomplish? Totally different world. prioritized learning over seeking approval. So we talked about this with like the engineer who's like, you need to prioritize learning at work. It's important, and there are good reasons for that. But interestingly, for code reviews, you really do need to obtain approval. Ironically, like there is a button or a link in those tools like GitHub that says approve, and you can't commit or deploy your code until that reviewer approved it. And for good reason, right? Because we don't want to like have buggy code bring down the internet or like misguide an autonomous vehicle. It's really important to do that. I just want to tell one story here that was, I read this yesterday. A friend who I used to work with at Google, she's an engineer, tweeted a story about how one of her first projects, she had written a code review, sent it, made some changes to some code, sent it off for review, didn't know the reviewer, he was off in a different office, didn't know her. He kind of ignored it, he didn't think it was very important, he was really busy, didn't think it mattered. It was really slow, and it took her a long time, she had to keep asking him for his review. He finally gave it. Her next performance review, she got a bad review for being slow. And so this approval, which is absolutely needed, and I'm not saying we should not do this, but it could be, this code review process can be a place for really anti-collaborative behavior, right? And so we need to think about the norms there. I never had a single conversation about this at Google, by the way, in all my 9 years there. This is something I'm thinking about after the fact. Okay, 2 more. You're supposed to focus on the process, not the result. And my husband, who's very artistic, he remembers in college an art professor telling him that in his art, and when he was painting, like, stop thinking about what it's going to look like at the end. Just enjoy the process. So here's one where I really think it's okay. We really do have to deliver the end product. That's what we do. We deliver, and I think that some of these things are like, okay, there's a contradiction here, but yeah, we need to deliver. You can't just sit there and learn forever and not push things out to the world. Similarly here, choose learning well over learning fast. So yeah, if you're a kid, you have all the time in the world to learn. There's no rush. Like, I'm not gonna I really don't get trying to make a 4th grader do 8th grade math. Like, you have all the time in the world, but in tech, in industry, you really don't have all the time in the world. You really need to, there's deadlines and you need to get stuff out. So you're encouraged to deliver as fast as possible. I will say that Edmund Lau, that author that I mentioned about effective engineering, one of the second things he said is you not only need to invest in your own learning, but in your own iteration speed. So that is something you should actively figure out how to do for yourself. It's like, if I want to have time to learn, I want to have time to think through, and be able to do the parts of engineering I really like. I need to automate and speed up the parts I don't like. So it's not like you just ignore this and say, no, just learn, but think consciously about it. So before I let you go, in some ways, what I'm saying is, look, yes, like any culture, it's a culture of contradictions. But we don't, one thing that I'm trying to do is, what I used to do is just kind of passively accept the culture that I was dropped into. Oh, this is how we do code reviews. Like, we don't really talk. The person might be right next to me, but we're just going to type in here. We're going to talk about this project, never like in real life. Don't accept that. Or if someone is, if there are behaviors that are completely counter to making you feel inspired, which is what, and excited about technology, then don't accept them. So I'm not just waiting for somebody to create a culture that I like. I am trying to be really conscious in cultivating that myself. And I'm really lucky. If you're at a place that embraces that, which I am, Threadloom is one of the reasons I joined it, is because it's a very thoughtful place where I feel like I'm going to be able to do this. And so I'm really fortunate. If you're at a place where it's really not like that, and I've been in places like that too, even finding one other person who is willing to collaborate with you in a way that you find motivating and inspiring, even there's that one little partnership that you have in the midst of any kind of other dysfunctionality can really, really make a difference. You will be more productive, you will be more successful, you will have more fun, and you never know. There might be people around you who have been passively accepting the culture who might start to notice how you eyes are operating, and it might rub off on other people. They might be craving something else, but just hadn't taken the initiative to change things. So thank you, and I also want to thank my son, who's now in middle school. He actually helped me with the messaging of this because he was held captive in a car as I was picking him up from track practice, and I was like, I can't just whine about all these things. So it was really fun. He actually wrote down this whole brainstorm for me about ideas for messaging, and now he thinks that I owe him a $100 consulting fee, so wish me luck with that. Thank you.